world between people who do more traditional things, which would be like Oriental. Cabaret's not really traditional, but it kind of edges that way. And what I do, which is tribal. And tribal, I was attracted to immediately because it looks like it has more strength. Just the way that people move is it's more muscular versus skeletal, so it already just has that look in the way that the dance is structured. But then also, people who do tribal are kind of allowed to express more variance in emotion. And allowed to wear different types of costuming. So you're not kind of stuck being the really cute, coy, flirtatious person. You're allowed to inhabit a lot of different personalities, from something that is really emotional and vulnerable, to something that's really strong, to even something that's a little freaky and scary if you feel like going that direction. So in some sense, kind of jumping back to that gorilla tango thing with the burlesque that's really a little dicey maybe. I'm actually in really early stages right now of pre-producing a belly dance show that's going to be, there's a very high proportion, at least in the tribal world, of belly dancers who are huge geeks.
Burlesque too.
Yeah, huge. So between the troupe that I'm in, pretty much everyone is a huge nerd. One of the girls was in A Klingon Christmas Carol, which was a She was in it as the Orion slave girl, and I mean, this girl you watch her, she can really dance. She's absolutely fantastic. So I have a whole group of belly dancers who are really, really geeky, and I thought it'd be fun to do a geek belly dance show with people who can actually move, versus there's a lot of stuff on YouTube where people just kind of dance awkwardly in slave Leia costumes, and apparently win competitions at NerdCons. So I thought we need to do this right, and since this is something that we're already doing, that we've spent many, many years and hours training on, it's not going to be this kind of exploitative thing where it's just, oh look, there's a girl who's not wearing clothing.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really applicable in the burlesque world. Cosplay and burlesque are sort of sisters in a really interesting way. There is because of the costuming, the amount that you put into this character that you're creating, this whole persona really goes into burlesque. And so I think that when I see a geek-themed burlesque that is performed by people who may not have that interest, while there are a ton of other burlesque performers or performers in general, where that is truly their passion, and they would do anything to be able to really bring that out in a burlesque art form, but feel that they can't because somebody else has done it already. That's sort of doing them a disservice as well, because then, like Dawn said, then they can actually do it right. There would be like that passion and that homage instead of it just being some girl parading around in nothing.
So, and I guess, Dawn, you really need to make sure that we all know about when that belly dance show thing is going on.
Is it right now?
Early pre-production, it's probably going to come in August, and probably at the Viaduct Theater.
Yeah,
so we're working on confirming dates.
Do you need a lighting designer?
Do you need a photographer? This is we'll be right back.
Actually, I don't know if we can switch to that topic. Do you mind if I think of it?
No, go ahead. Yes.
I know we've been talking a lot about sort of obstacles and challenges and so on, but when I was thinking of the panel topic, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is, in terms of being a woman and being a geek, is about networking, actually. And
yeah, definitely.
Different,
look at this.
sort of the different way in which, my experiences in science fiction culture have been really strongly influenced by my, tendency to organize people. Right, let's find a way to put this nicely.
But you don't know what you're talking about at all.
This, and I don't know a whole lot about the sort of science of boys are better at this and girls are better at that. I do have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, one of each gender, and so I read this book, Pink Brain, Blue Brain, which I recommend anyone with kids, because it actually takes all the studies and kind of summarizes them. It's really good about these gender differences. And essentially the conclusion it comes to is there are some hardwired differences. They are hugely magnified by culture, and they're much bigger than we think. The cultural things make them much bigger than they actually are. But the point here, which was that there does seem to be something about women are better at certain types of socializing, right? And I think, in my experience in geek culture has been things like starting up a magazine, starting up another magazine, starting a Kiwanis Foundation. And it's like this sort of default of like, oh, here's a problem, you know, we don't have enough pro slots or whatever. Let me talk to a whole bunch of people and talk them into volunteering a lot of their time in order to create straight rises or whatever it is, right? And I think this is, you know, the same thing as the women who organize knitting circles, and you know, there's this strength to that, and I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's in terms of like how do we function to build community? How do we interact with each other in these ways that are maybe more comfortable for us?
Well, you know, that's actually really interesting because being a geek and being a photographer has made me really accessible to my clients in particular. I do a lot of boudoir work, which is really sort of an intimate setting, you know, scantily clad nude ladies hanging out in my studio. And it's a really, it's just a really intimate setting, and nerves, you know, and they're just nervous and shy, and being able to connect with them in a conversation over Doctor Who, or, you know, what their favorite Indiana Jones movie is, or just little things like that has really made a difference in making them feel comfortable. Whereas instead, I'm not just this, you know, obviously being a woman has helped when there's a naked lady in front of me rather than me being a man, but there is also this connect that happens that I don't think could happen if I wasn't able to relate to them with geek interests.
Yeah, I know, like, for the first time I ever met Dawn, who's really the first person I met out of all of you, she'd been working with my husband. He says, like, yeah, I met this girl, you really need to meet her. She came back to the apartment, she walks into our room and sees posters that we have of The Last Starfighter, The Never Ending Story. She takes a look at my toys and she looks around, she's like, yeah, we're gonna get along just fine. And when I took Marianne's class, I really like writing speculative fiction, but I had been very hesitant to workshop it in classes because I had professors who looked at it as, oh, it's not really a legitimate form of literature. And you were really one of the first writing professors I had who was not only, you know, okay when we bring you in, you were very actively supportive about having me workshop more of that kind of work. And I know that a lot of my main connections that I know that I've gotten with women have been when I meet someone who has a geek interest, it's like this immediate light switch on. And it sounds like a lot of you have had that same kind of experience. Like, it's not just when you meet someone who's in the same field, but when you can connect on that, oh, you know who Doctor Who is, or you know the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars, which I didn't know for the longest time. I said late bloomer,
I will give you an anecdote to go back to the community building thing for a minute about how, this is a teaching anecdote. There's a South Asian theater organization in Chicago called Roscoe Theater Company that I worked with for a while. And at one point, we were having an organizational meeting, and we had a great meeting, everyone was full of ideas, blah, 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 made a whole bunch of plans. This was all over food. The meeting ended, and whether anyone can tell you what happened then. What happened then is that the women got up and started cleaning up. And for the next half an hour, the women cleaned up while the men sat and kept talking. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic. And I think if you were involved in this sort of geeky, I would say, you know, theater is geeky in a different sort of way from sci-fi, but geeky. If you're involved in this sort of geeky activity, think about sort of what signals you're sending by what you choose to engage in and what you choose not to engage in. Because, you know, some of the best conversations are going to happen over the dishes, and, you know, you may just lose out on that if you're not a part of it. And I think there are these big social forces that are pushing the men to just sit there, right? And pushing the women to get up and clean, right? And that we have to kind of interrogate that together if we want it to change. So,
and I think that would be a good point to moving on to opening up the floor to questions. If anybody wants to, wants to, we've got a mic up here. If you feel like getting up and standing in front of everybody. And for an enticement, I have the first 4 people up get a prize.
Nicely done.
Also, I'm going to have you take your clothes off when I take a picture.
I've got other things.
All right, go ahead.
Hi, question I've got is on what your impressions are about, it's a thing, because we talk a lot about representations of women within geek media, but something I've been thinking about lately has been representations of geek women within media, because sometimes it's, spot on, sometimes it's like the person who wrote this doesn't actually know how video games work, and then there's one stereotype I've seen a lot where it's like, all right, we'll have the girl, and we'll show that she's a geek by having her be way better at gaming than the boys, but she won't have an attitude or any awareness of it, which is a complete lie, because whenever I lose to my female friends at Soul Calibur 3, I do not hear the end of it.
We're floaters.
5 minutes minimum. So I was wondering what your impressions were about representations you've seen of geek women in media, and ones that you thought really nailed it, and ones that you thought were completely off or patronizing or condescending.
I think my favorite of the really patronizing, ridiculous ones are she's a geek because her hair's in a ponytail and she's wearing glasses.
She takes them off, she's beautiful.
Right, and nobody talks to her and
Only if
she's
she
weird because
tosses
she's
her
wearing
hair.
glasses. It's
Yeah.
the weirdest thing. Who decided that was right? It's so, and all of a sudden she takes down her ponytail and the guy's like, oh, you're the most beautiful girl.
Can I tell you an anecdote though? I had a dinner party where someone I didn't know very well, her husband came and I didn't know him at all, and he was from France, and we had a nice dinner party with wine, and at some point over the course of the evening, he turned to me and he said, so, your house is so lovely and you look so nice, why would you leave your hair up in a ponytail? Don't you think that, you should have more consideration for your guests? And it turned into this whole conversation.